All right, let's think about it. You're starting up your business. Now, most people, when they're starting up their business, think of things like accounting and staffing. But how many really take time to consider the legalities? Let's help out with some business world legalese as Peter sits down with Morelli Chertkow attorney Scott Huyghebaert.
Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Peter.
So, we've been getting a lot of emails in from various different fans and different business people. And I know a lot of things come up in conversation in the teams as well with regards to, legal advice. What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? Obviously, entrepreneurs aren't lawyers, but you happen to be both. So we've got you in the studio today to give us some advice.
Yeah, I'm not sure that lawyers are ever much for entrepreneurs, but we try sometimes. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So maybe to start off with, what are some of the biggest mistakes or things that startups, entrepreneurs don't really consider from a legal perspective?
I think one of the things that I often see is that people don't have a really clear idea of just exactly what it is they're going to do. They come first with this sort of loosely formed idea that they're kind of excited about, but not really sure just exactly what it is they're going to do, not exactly sure where they're going to do it, who their market is.
So how does that actually create a problem? Obviously, it creates a problem from a marketing perspective and from a sales perspective, but from a legal perspective.
Lots of the problems that are created are not so much legal ones, other than the tangle that ends up at the end when the business doesn't do well and people are bailing off it, like off a ship that's going down.
Right.
And what you end up with at the end is somebody responsible for some costs and expenses. And I think a lot of that can be prevented by just some of the business planning, and in terms of looking at, who's their market. Is it really an idea that just they and some of their close friends are excited about, or is there really a market for it?
Right.
I'm sure you're coming across in the race to a million lots of consideration about product placement and price and decisions like that, and those are some things that people really need to think about ahead of time and get some advice, from some professionals about.
That's very good advice. What about things like classifications of business? I know that I get a lot of questions of, what's the difference between a self-employed and sole proprietor and a corporation and a limited partnership, and what does all that mean?
Okay. The simplest form of anyone carrying on any kind of business is through what we call a sole proprietorship, and that's just me doing business under either my name or under a proprietorship name. It's possible for me to start a plumbing and heating business, and I can call it Scott Huyghebaert's Plumbing and Heating, or I can call it, I'm just going to make up a name, but I can call it Kamloops A1 Plumbing and Heating. And what I do in that circumstance is I register that Kamloops A1 Plumbing and Heating name as a proprietorship. And it's a simple, inexpensive way to go about doing it. And it allows me the ability to carry on business under a name other than my own. It's still me. Mm-hmm. It's still me that's responsible for all of the obligations of the company. It's still me that's entitled to all of the benefits of the income of the company. When that company buys something, it's on my credit. When it sells something, it's to my account. And so at the end of the year, when I'm accounting for whether I made a profit in that business or not, it blends with the other income that I might have earned or might not have earned from other sources. And so all of the deductions for expenses related to the operation of that business are available to me in my personal income tax return. The disadvantage of that, of course, is that if the business doesn't do well or doesn't go well, then all of the responsibility for the liabilities of that business fall to me. The second most common structure is that of an incorporated company, and the advantage of that is that there is limited liability. It is the company as a separate legal entity that's responsible for the debts and obligations of that company, and also responsible for all of the actions of that company. There are some exceptions, and we can talk about those in a minute. But what it really comes down to is, by incorporating, you create a separate legal entity that is its own thing. It would have a bank account in its name. It would file income tax returns in its name. It would carry on business in its name. It would have its own insurance. It would be responsible for employees and all of those things. And it's going to be an entity where it has LTD or limited or Inc. or incorporated or company at the end of its name. And quite often people talk about a proprietorship as though it's a company. And it's really quite important that people understand, that there is a difference. And the primary motivations for most people in terms of making a decision to incorporate come around to what are the risks of liability here, either financial or of the company being sued for something going wrong, and what are the prospects for making more money than maybe I need right at the time to be able to defer the payment of some income taxes, or to be able to split some income from that business to some other family members. In terms of the liability, things that I think should be incorporated, obviously some risky ones. If you're going to take people, hang gliding or parachute jumping or parasailing behind your boat, or if you're going to rent boats or do trail rides or things like that where there's a real risk that people might be hurt, then in addition to carrying insurance, one of the things that a person can do to protect their own personal assets is to incorporate. Because in that case, if something goes wrong, it's the company that's legally responsible for what went wrong. And the owner of the company or the shareholder in the company, their personal assets are protected. And that's what that whole concept of limited liability is about. The other one that's common is a partnership. And you see that in professional organizations. Our law firm is a partnership. And a partnership is similar to a sole proprietorship, except that it's more than one person carrying on that sole proprietorship.
So everybody's personally responsible.
Yes. I'm responsible for the acts of my partners. They're responsible for my acts. When it comes the end of the year, instead of what happens with a sole proprietorship, all of that money being attributed to me in terms of my income tax return, it gets divided in a manner that we've agreed among the partners, and all of the money flows through to the partners. There's no opportunity for deferral.
Is there a reason why the average person that was starting up a business, whether it be small or medium-sized type business, why they would choose to have a limited liability partnership or a partnership as opposed to a corporation?
Most of the time, the decisions are based on simplicity. It's a little simpler to do. It's certainly less expensive. There isn't the administrative overhead that comes with a limited liability company. With a partnership, we're going to have some accounting to determine what the income is for our partnership, and then that just flows to me and it flows to you, and that's all we need to do. With a limited liability company, it has to have its own tax return. It needs to make filings every year to satisfy the requirements of the registrar of companies, to make sure that that the information the registrar of companies has is up to date. And so there are some additional expenses related to those things. Some legal costs in preparing those documents for the registrar of companies, some accounting costs in terms of preparing the income tax returns related to the company. And then there are some accounting and legal costs in terms of getting the money out of the company that doesn't come out as a salary. If we get to the end of the year and we see that there's lots of money left in our company and we somehow want to bonus that out, then we need to have some advice and some help as to how we do that, whether we do that as a dividend, whether we do that as some sort of management bonus. And there are some accounting and legal fees that you'll incur in doing that work.
Right.
And so it's a more expensive way to operate. You need to have a separate HST and WCB and all of those registrations for the limited liability company. It's not one that you can run off your personal accounts. You need to have a separate bank account, and so it just becomes a little bit more complicated to operate.
Okay. with regards to the you've got corporation, you've got limited liability partnership or partnership in general.
Yeah.
I know that you and I have had discussions in the past where we've talked about something more than just the corporation, and that's shareholders agreements.
Yes.
How does that play into the mix when it's a corporation or a partnership?
Okay. Well, the idea is going to be the same whether it's a partnership or a shareholders agreement. Just what we're going to call it, and some of the mechanics of it change. But the idea of a shareholders agreement is it's going to talk about who among the shareholders is going to be tasked with what responsibilities. So it's a good exercise for people who are thinking of going into business together, because it has them sit down and look at what are our responsibilities going to be? What are we each going to bring to this company? If it's one person bringing the money and the other person doing the work, then if that's set out clearly in an agreement, then that leads to a place where there's less likely to be friction and resentment later.
Of all of the successful entrepreneurs in town that you've helped exit from their businesses and exit well,
Yes.
what do you see as a common underlying factor that has been sort of key to their success?
I think the key to the success in any business, and especially the most successful ones that I've seen, is the willingness and the ability of the people involved in the business to adapt. To be able to say, yeah, we started off doing this, but this opportunity came up, and so we veered over here a little bit. And just to be willing to say, what my initial idea was a good idea, but maybe here's a slightly different version of that idea or a twist on that idea. And I think that's got to be the key to anybody who's going to be successful in business is some flexibility, and not, the idea that I have is right and I'm going to jam it down the throat of my customers and the public. It's a willingness to be flexible, I think.
Well, thank you very much for joining us in the studio today, Scott.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Peter. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Scott Huyghebaert, Morelli Chertkow.